What is the claim of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Well, the claim is quite simple. It's that Jesus Christ died on the cross for the sins of the world and physically rose again from the dead on the third day. So the claim is not that Jesus rose spiritually or symbolically, but that he rose from the dead physically. That on the third day, Jesus walked out of the tomb with a glorified body. And I want to give you one argument for believing in the resurrection. There are dozens of arguments you could make, but I'm going to give you one argument for believing in the resurrection. I'm going to give you this argument because when I was in college, I had a friend who would say something like this to me all the time. He would say, Dan, I'll become a Christian when I'm ready to throw my brain in the trash can. Or when I'm ready to flush my brain down the toilet, I will become a Christian, implying there are no good reasons to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. And so remember, there are many arguments. I'm just going to give you one argument. And this argument has 5 pieces of evidence, and all the pieces of evidence go together. And these pieces of evidence are through the eyes of the women in Mark chapter 16. Mark chapter 16. So here we go. Number 1, they knew Jesus was dead. They knew Jesus was dead. Jesus really died. In John chapter 19, we find these women at the cross. They watched him suffer. They knew that he had been beaten brutally. They saw the nails in his hands and in his feet. They saw when the sword pierced his side. They knew that he was dead. Number 2, they knew where Jesus was buried. They were there when Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took Jesus down off the cross and wrapped him with 75 pounds of spices. They were there when they laid him in the tomb. They were there when the stone covered the tomb, closed off the tomb. So they knew where he was buried. So on that first Easter morning, they did not go to the wrong tomb. Third, I should say, they discovered the empty tomb. They discovered the empty tomb. Early in the morning, we see in verses 1 and 2, that they went to the tomb with spices to anoint the dead body of Jesus. They did not expect to find a resurrected Jesus. And when they first get there, they see that the tomb is empty. And as you follow the story throughout the Gospels, it becomes crystal clear that no one expected Jesus to rise from the dead. They were not expecting to find a living Jesus. Do you know why they weren't expecting to find a living Jesus? Well, it's because people don't rise from the dead, and that's why. And sometimes it's easy to think about ancient people as being highly gullible or ready to believe nonsense. We can think of them as not being very intelligent. But what we see is that they had the same skepticism we do today about the resurrection. They weren't eager to believe that someone had risen from the dead. They didn't will themselves into believing something that wasn't true. Sometimes we can do that. We can want something to be true so badly, we lead ourselves into the belief of something that's not true at all. But this is not what's happening in the story. They were highly skeptical of the resurrection of Jesus. And you see their skepticism throughout the gospel records. There are many examples like this, but one of them is in John chapter 20. When Mary Magdalene discovers the empty tomb, she runs and tells Peter and John that his body is gone. And this is what she says in verse 2. She says, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they put him." So notice, she doesn't jump to the resurrection. When she discovers the empty tomb, she doesn't say, "He has risen. He has risen indeed." That's not what she says at all. She just says, she thinks, someone has taken his body. So why did they believe in the resurrection? If they were skeptical about the resurrection, why did they come to believe in the resurrection? Number 4, they saw Jesus themselves. It's because they saw Jesus themselves. They followed Jesus for several years. They watched him die. They knew where he was buried. They discovered the empty tomb. They heard the angel's announcement. And then finally, they saw him. They actually saw Jesus alive from the dead. Matthew 28, verse 9. Just then Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." They came up, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. They talked with him. They saw him. They hugged him. They looked him in the eye. They said, "He's really alive. He's alive. We've seen him with our own eyes." Number 5, they watched the eyewitnesses suffer and die for their testimony. They watched the eyewitnesses suffer and die for their testimony. Jesus didn't only appear to the women. He appeared to hundreds of other people. And if you were those women who discovered the empty tomb and then you saw Jesus, it would be easy to pinch yourself and wonder, did we really just see that? Is this a dream? What's going on here? It would be easy to wonder, what was in that burrito last night? Is that what is giving me these visions right now? What is happening? Am I sick? What's happening? Why does it seem like I'm looking at Jesus? But see, these women saw Jesus with their eyes. But then all of their friends, nearly all of their friends, the disciples and hundreds of other people saw Jesus with their eyes. And these people, many of them, suffered and died for their testimony that Jesus was alive, that he was alive. And see, people die for their faith all the time. They're mistaken, but they die for their faith all the time. People of other religions. But the nature of what the disciples claimed is very different than what people proclaim today. See, the disciples preached not an empty tomb, but they preached a resurrected Christ. And had they stolen the body, hid the body, and then lied about Jesus being alive, then what would be their incentive to lie about Jesus being alive if they knew they had stolen the body? And it wasn't that they just saw the empty tomb and then inferred that Jesus was alive. That would not have been enough to convince them that Jesus was alive. So what happened? Well, they saw him, and they went to their death proclaiming not an empty tomb, but a resurrected Christ. He is alive from the dead. And this is the message that has turned the world upside down. Now, this argument does not produce 100% certainty of the resurrection. It doesn't prove that these women are telling the truth about their eyewitness experience. But this argument has stood the test of time. I mean, countless people have tried to refute this argument over the last 2,000 years. And this argument still stands today as the best explanation for the resurrection or the empty tomb. It is the resurrection. This argument provides a rational basis for believing that Christ has risen from the dead. And I say this because many people, they will browbeat you into believing, if you believe in the resurrection, it's because you're dumb. You're not logical. You're not very intelligent. You're throwing your brain in the trash can. But as Christians, we have a rational basis, a logical basis, a historical basis, and most importantly, we have a biblical basis for believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ.